Joanna Vicente, Executive Director of IFP and Made in New York Media Center, and I'm thrilled to introduce the first industry talk at the conference with Christine Vachon and Michael Barker. Christine Vachon is an amazing producer who founded indie powerhouse Killer Films with partner Pamela Koffler in 1995, so they're celebrating their 20th anniversary. She has produced incredible films including Boys Don't Cry, Far From Heaven, Mildred Pierce for HBO, Still Alice, and Todd Haynes' upcoming Carol. It's also my great pleasure to introduce Michael Barker, who's co-president and co-founder of Sony Pictures Classics. And Sony Pictures Classics has distributed and often produced some of the finest independent movies over the past 25 years, including Midnight in Paris, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Blue Jasmine, Capote, Whiplash, and the upcoming Truce. I think we're all in for quite a conversation. So Christine and Michael, please come in. I'm turning it to you.
Hello.
Hello.
Where should we start?
I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you where we should start.
Okay, I had a feeling you wouldn't be at a loss for words.
No, she told me
Okay.
how we can start.
All right.
This is the 20th anniversary of Christine's company.
And almost the 25th of yours.
And starting in January, it'll be the 25th anniversary of Sony Pictures Classics. So, we've been around a long time. Where did you start, Christine?
I'll make that brief because that could take up our entire 45 minutes.
Good.
But I started in New York in the late 80s at a time where, and maybe you have some comments about this time too, at a time where it felt like there was a real resurgence of personal filmmaking that wasn't highly experimental, that was narrative. And people like Jim Jarmusch and Spike Lee were making their first movies. And it was kind of an amazing time to be in New York and to think about being in film. And Todd Haynes at that time was making a movie that I hope some of you have seen called Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story. Okay, if you haven't, you can illegally download it very easily from YouTube, and I suggest you do immediately. Seeing that movie, I'm cutting a long story short.
Did you know him before you saw that movie?
I knew him from college, but when I saw that movie, it was when I thought, this is the kind of movie I want to make. Like, this is it. This is provocative, it's exciting, it's completely original, but it's also entertaining. And those are the kind of movies I've tried to make. And how did you get started?
No. Something that's very similar about both of us is we attach ourselves to filmmakers and then we try to stick with them. Even if we have periods of time we're not with them, right, they'll come back to us or we'll come back to them. It's almost like a commitment to the auteur theory, you know. It's like when I was 14 or 15, I remember I was in an airport and I got that book, that American Cinema book by Andrew Sarris. I didn't understand any of it when I was reading it, but I put in my mind, hey, I'm watching all these movies even as a kid and I loved them, but the filmmaker is the person behind it. Right. And that resonated with me from the time I was a kid till this very moment. And sometimes that's a bit of a through line to my career, just like Todd is a bit of a through line to yours and other filmmakers that you go back to again,
But the way we first got involved with each other was I was making Todd's film Safe, and Julianne Moore, who was the star of Safe, who hadn't done a whole lot before then. She had done The Hand That Rocks the Cradle and General Hospital, I think. And,
do you know the story of how that happened?
I do know, which is why I'm bringing it up so you can tell it.
We liked Poison, that was his first film, and of course we loved Christine. And the script for Safe was one of these red button scripts. We're like, whoa, this thing is really kind of shocking, but it's done in a kind of logical way. And you would send us shots of where you shot the movie,
Right.
and we just kept thinking about it.
Which wasn't easy in those days because
Yeah.
there was no internet.
So we were making the movie Vanya on 42nd Street with our good friend Louis Malle, and he had shot that movie in 12 days or whatever, and he was editing. That's the story you want to hear? Okay, all right. He was editing down on 42nd Street, and one day he called me, and he said, you and Tom have got to get down here as quickly as possible. So we went down to the editing room, and there was Julianne Moore, and she has this very long speech. I would say it lasts easily 5 minutes. And when he shot it, she gave the speech, and then he said to her, let's do something a little different. You don't speak a word, but we're going to put the camera on your face for the duration of the entire speech, and just as an experiment, let's see how your face would respond as you think in your brain how you say the words. And then we'll put the words over it as a voiceover. So we saw this thing where it's just a close-up of Julie's face for 5 or 6 minutes, and the voice is over, and the precision of every beat in that speech of her expressing what she's going through was just mind-blowing, and it was going on for 5 minutes. And I remember Louis said under his breath, Meryl Streep, eat your heart out. and we left that editing room, and we bought Safe.
Pretty
Sight
much.
unseen.
Pretty
we
much.
just bought it. It's like, man, if she could do that, imagine what she's going to do in Safe. And that's how that happened. And now, what's great about that, the through line
Right.
of us, is that was 20 years ago, and last year we released Still Alice, and Julianne Moore finally won her Oscar.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And, you know, we've worked with you on a number of films since then, but not with Todd.
No, I know.
And hopefully that's what you mean, that door will swing back
Always.
open, and we'll figure one of those out.
No, you know, when I saw Mildred Pierce, I was like, oh my God, that could have been incredible if we could have talked to HBO into us having special events in movie theaters and so forth. You know, Todd has always been he's always broken through to new and different ways of telling these stories. So absolutely, he's one of the best.
So, my company is I wouldn't say struggling, because we're not, but we're rising to the challenge of all the differing platforms, and we're making a lot more television. Our core business is still theatrical feature films, and we're actually making more than we've ever made. You know, we're making more per year than we're making 3, 4, sometimes even 5 in a year, sometimes as executive producers. Now, you guys have been so staunch about how much you believe in theatrical, and I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and how you're rising to the challenge.
I think there's room for all of it. There's room for so many different ways of distributing a film, because there's so many different types of films that come your way. But the films that we become attached to, whether it's at script stage or when they're finished, are the films that demand a theatrical release. And for us, the theatrical release is still the gold standard in impressing. You see, when you open a movie theatrically, if you're an independent company or into independent films, it's not all about how much money you make in the first release. It's about the ability to make that title distinctive enough so that it stands the test of time, so that it becomes an evergreen, so that people keep coming back to it again and again and again. If you have a full theatrical release, you're able to have a profile in the marketplace that makes that impression on an audience that they'll remember the title even if they don't see it in the first release. And they may hear from people 3, 4 months, 6 months down the road, this is a great film, and then they'll see it. It's movies that depend a lot on word of mouth. They're movies that you have to have confidence. They're very, very good. And I contend, whether it's Lives of Others or Still Alice, this is the way to go to get the most eyeballs to see your film, and this is the way to go for your film to live on from decade to decade, and it's the way to go to make the most money on your film. If you can make a mark theatrically and have that distinction, become distinctive in the audience's brain, or a substantial size of the audience's brain, then what happens is you can make money and get revenues off of pay TV, and then home entertainment, VOD, then free television, then streaming. It's just, these windows can go on forever and ever. Our job in the theatrical marketplace is to make that film distinctive so it can catch hold of the audience. And I don't think that's going away. I really don't.
I completely agree with you. I guess from my point of view, my challenge as a producer, and this is what we interrogate ourselves on all the time, is what makes something theatrical. And when we get a script and we have to decide, and maybe if we decide it isn't theatrical, that doesn't necessarily mean we won't get involved. You know, we may still think it's worth making. You know, one of the things that, you know, I found, like with Still Alice, is that often when a film is female-driven, people say, oh, it's a television movie. And to me, that's code for there's too many women in it, you know? And that was levied at Still Alice a lot, but I always felt that that core performance and the filmmaking so elevated it that of course it was theatrical. That one I never had a doubt in my mind.
But I feel that independent films, the core audience, the number one audience are usually women. Mm-hmm. Number two audience are usually older people.
Right.
The number three
Sometimes
audience
it's a combo.
is the gay audience,
Right.
regardless of content.
Right.
Okay? And then you have different ethnic audiences, like a Jewish audience or Hispanic audience that key to certain films. Those are the audiences that have provided our livelihoods in a way, you know. Someone on my staff gave me a piece of paper because she had she had heard from the CEO of Sony answering a question of the company somehow being criticized for not doing movies with female directors, and she put this paper on my desk, and we have worked with 51 female directors, many of which multiple times.
Right.
And that's great for us, but in a way, it doesn't speak. It could be because the bigger companies aren't paying attention to those female directors, you know. But the fact of the matter is, what you're saying about the TV movie, we get that all the time, you know.
Absolutely. All right, your turn.
To ask a question?
Yeah.
What's the question? Well, how is working for television like HBO different from making these nuts to bolts kind of theatrical films?
Well, working for HBO isn't really that different because, shooting Mildred Pierce was basically like shooting a 5-hour film. The only big difference was in post-production because each episode had to be finished separately. In other words, Todd had to be finished completely with his first episode before he'd even started on his 5th, which is a little bit of a mind fuck for a director who usually sees their entire, project as one, entire film as one thing. So HBO was like working with a terrific, studio with great executives, and it was a great experience all around. However, now we're doing television that is much more episodic. We just did a pilot for Amazon, where we have to start thinking, like, not just like what does our pilot look like, but what does year 2 look like? And that's been, it's been a challenge in a great way, though. I mean, it's kind of getting our filmmakers to start thinking that way too. I'm finding that a lot of the younger filmmakers who come in and talk to us, they will say, "This is my feature film idea. This is my, mini series idea. This is my web series idea. this is my episodic idea. They kind of have already formulated all these different types of stories they want to tell. The filmmakers that have been making movies for a long time aren't quite, they don't move as fluidly, but once they kind of sit down and figure out like, oh, this is how I could bend this idea into something episodic, they get kind of, they get excited by it.
I just remembered a question I want to ask you, okay? Have you ever had a movie that doesn't turn out the way you wanted it to turn out? And then how did you deal with that? Maybe it was disappointing, maybe it was, it's still your film.
Right.
How do you deal with something like that? It's different from the question of how you deal with Carol. Everybody loves Carol. It's going to be a big movie, whatever.
Carol has been to 2 film festivals. Yeah. We'll see.
Okay.
Okay. Whenever a movie doesn't do what you want it to do, I mean, there's 2 things. Does the movie turn out the way you want it to? And that's, one question. And then there's like, well, what if it did and it doesn't get the reaction, whether by box office or critics or both, that you wanted? And I find that often there's always like, especially with the filmmaker, the dialogue's like, oh, the one sheet was wrong, they didn't spend enough, there was no TV, or the TV was bad. But sometimes it's just that people didn't want to see it. And that's kind of the hardest thing. Sometimes you put it all out there and it's great as it can be, and people just aren't that interested. And has happened, that's happened to me before. It's happened to me with movies that we've done together before. But when it doesn't turn out the way you want it to, I mean, I guess it's in some ways you just have to, our movies get this moniker attached to them, this dreaded moniker, which is execution dependent, which is, when we're trying to pre-sell our movies, that's always, we love the director, we love the cast. It's just that this particular script is execution dependent, which means no one will know if it's any good until it's done. And that's because usually there's something in it that's, which is why I wanted to do it, which is original or, something that's a leap of faith, that's a true leap of faith. So sometimes I'm taking that leap of faith too,
Yeah, that's a very common position to take, execution dependent. You need something to put you over, like the story I told about Julianne Moore.
Right.
You see her do that, you read the script.
Right.
Okay, now we're in a zone where you feel more comfortable, in making a commitment. No, the first 10 or 15 years I was in the business, when a film did not work, I always said, okay, my job is to take the blame for all of it. Like, not enough money spent, the poster was bad, trailer was bad, picked the wrong theater, whatever. It was always going to be our fault. I thought that's kind of the lexicon of the film distribution business. But then, what I realized after being in the business for a long time, some of the people, you being one of them, and filmmakers especially, when you go through a film that maybe was not what it should be, or it's rejected by the audience and no one understands why, that we love or the filmmaker loves, going through the trenches through that, after I've been in the business 35 years, some of those people have become, we bonded with them through the failure. Absolutely. It was like we bonded. Those people, we're really close, and those people come back to us. In the first 10 or 15 years of my career, I never thought that'd be possible.
Yeah, well, success is harder than failure. It really, I think sometimes it is. All right, now let me think of a question for you. So, what are you seeing? I mean, presumably, you guys see everything. And are you seeing any, I talk a lot and I'm sure any of you who've ever seen me speak before, or who ever followed me on social media at all, know I talk a lot about we should all be calling ourselves storytellers now, or content makers, and we have to start being more fluid between the platforms, and that's the way to stay alive. And I'm just wondering if you're seeing real trends with new filmmakers, or the new kinds of movies that you're seeing, and in positive ways.
Absolutely. I'm seeing stories told in new and different ways, some of which may be able to be monetized and some not yet.
Right.
Okay? This year has kind of blown my mind. I'm the co-chairman of the board of the Museum of Moving Image, and I went out there to see, I don't know if you saw that exhibit on storytelling with the Oculus, with the 360-degree, you get the thing?
Yeah.
And I was like floored, because there was one story which was like this Saudi Arabian movie we had called Wajda, and I realized, oh my gosh, if Wajda had been told like this, it would be even greater than it was. And that kind of blows my mind. Or I see a movie, like a movie we have called Son of Saul, which is about Auschwitz. It was made in Hungary, and it looks different, but what it basically is kind of a throwback. The aspect ratio is 1:3:3. The film is shot and wants to be seen in 35 millimeter, but it's a kind of and the lead character's face is in the movie at all times, and it's unlike anything I've ever seen on the Holocaust, because you feel so engaged. You feel, oh, that person could be me. Maybe I would hide behind the door like he does. Maybe I wouldn't. It's a new kind of engagement in storytelling that we haven't seen before. Just yesterday, I happened to have a free afternoon, and I read this review from Manola Dargis of a film that we'd never seen, by Johnny Toe, that's playing at the AMC.
Oh, yeah.
It's a 2.5-hour musical, and I have a movie like that is not going to do well in America with audiences other than a specific kind of Asian audience, but it's a new way of storytelling. It is energy like you haven't seen before, and you go, wow, this feels like something new. And so I am really into this now, especially like what you say about Mildred Pierce. I've just binge watched this show Justified, and it's a mind blower. It's like, wow, it's incredible. And Elmore Leonard wrote almost all the scripts,
Right.
and so it has this, and we're missing a lot of these things that we should see. But there's a lot of new storytelling going on, especially in television, that I think will be reflected in the work that's going to happen in the future for theatrical films.
No, that's a good way. I mean, I find that one of the pleasures is the ability to be continually surprised.
Yeah. There's a film that won the Venice Film Festival. It's not our film. I don't think it's even been sold yet. It's from Venezuela. It's The Golden Lion. I saw it. I had a morning early in the morning. I went to see it in Toronto, and it's a psychological film where you're in the brain of these two people, and you really feel like you're thinking just like them. It's a new filmmaker, and you feel this is fresh, regardless of what someone thinks, whether the nature of the story is commercial or not. It's fresh storytelling, and that is going to be used in such a way where it's going to work, in a bigger way.
So is it time for us to open it up to the audience?
So, first of all, I'm a huge fan of yours, and I love that the films, Christine, that you have so often been, illuminated really difficult characters, and a lot of female protagonists, and a lot of times protagonists that the audience get behind, but maybe they're not even very likable. And, but I mean that in a loving way. And so I'm curious if there's an example of a film that you knew would be great. It was a story that you knew would be great, and you, couldn't get, people behind it, and you went for it anyway and kind of proved everybody wrong. I'm just curious if there's...
Well, I mean, the obvious answer to that is Boys Don't Cry, which was a real slog. I mean, one of the things I have to say is that I do have to remind myself, so once the movie comes out, I think it's like, the actual production, the financing and production of a film, it's like childbirth. You forget about it afterwards, or else you'd never have another one, And, Boys Don't Cry was something like 7 years in the, in the development and then finally the financing and it was really, we were very lucky that we had financiers that allowed us to go for an unknown as the lead, which Hillary was, believe it or not, at that time. But then the post-production was really tough because we had a 2.5-hour cut for about 9 months. But the thing was, that cut played. It actually was a really kind of, people...
That would have been the Sony Classics version.
Exactly. You don't have to cut a frame, kid. Would have been great. But it just was so hard because we would show it to friends and family, test screenings, etc., and people had an extraordinary experience watching that movie, but we knew that we would have such a bigger audience if we could just get it under 2 hours, which we eventually did. But it was really hard.
But how do you have the patience? 7 years. At what point, how do you tell yourself not to throw the towel in?
Well,
you have little things that are good signs? Well, what happens with that?
Sometimes you just put it on the shelf. I mean, we just finished production on a film called Goat, which I'm sure you've seen about 10 times. You're like, I don't remember it, but you have. David Gordon Green wrote the script 10 years ago. Literally 10 years ago. It was based on a memoir, and he wrote it when he was delighted to get Writers Guild minimum because, he'd made 2 movies that, hadn't really hit the zeitgeist yet. We tried to get it made with him. We couldn't. Then he kind of moved on from it. I kept it. It was a movie that I was very passionate about, and I just kept it in the back of my mind. And then we met a young filmmaker named Andrew Neal, who made a film called King Kelly, which I loved. And I was like, I had a eureka moment. Let's put him together with Goat. We finished shooting it, and hopefully we'll take it out this year.
Michael said you had 51 films by women directors.
Oh, well, I don't know. I think it's more than 51. I think it was 51 filmmakers over the many years. Yeah.
Question for you, Christine. How many experience working in television, with Amazon? The first time you worked, you said it was the first time you worked at episodic television. What is the experience like for you? How did it help you as a producer in terms of approaching future projects?
Well, the Amazon is just a pilot at this point, so we have to think about it episodically, but we haven't gotten there yet. I think the biggest lesson that I'm learning in television is what a writer's medium it is. And that's, you hear that and people tell you that and that's television's a writer's medium. But when you're actually doing it, especially coming from the world of feature filmmaking, where the writers often we work with a lot of writer-directors, granted, but often in feature filmmaking, the writers will get shunted off to the side. That is so not true in TV. And it's kind of interesting to watch the way the writers and the director all have to work, especially on a pilot, which is all about setting the tone, setting the creative essence of what this is going to be. And it's been very interesting.
I can't remember the name of the website, but I thought you created it or your company created it. It was like a community of filmmakers to connect with each other, and you could upload scripts. And I had a project up there for a while.
Massify. We didn't create that. We just came on Massify.com. I'm not even sure if it still exists, but it was something that Killer came on to do a specific contest where people uploaded their scripts and their pitches, and everybody was able to comment on each other's, and we ended up choosing 1 or 2 a year to make into short films. We did it for 2 years. This was already 7 or 8 years ago. So it's kind of ahead of its time. And we'd love to do something similar again. It was really fun. We just did a web series for Time about the 10th anniversary of Katrina that I wish I could tell you exactly where to find it. But I guess if you just did Katrina, Killer, Time, it might show up, or something else might with all those, So, but perhaps. So we're trying to do more and more of those kinds of I have a great idea, but it really is only 5 minutes long.
Michael, you had talked about window progression now being as strong off of a theatrical release as it had been in the past. But can you talk about some of the differences now in window progression versus maybe like 15 years ago?
Well, I think the video window is much closer. I think the norm is like 3.5 or 4 months. But the way Sony Classics works, we'll have a film like a Midnight in Paris where we'll say we want to put it off 6 months because it was in the theaters for a year. Or you have a film where you play off so quickly, you say to them, you could go as soon as you want now because we played off the whole country. So we're pretty flexible, but I think the norm now is about 3.5 months.
Do you find it's just more customized?
Yeah, well, ours is always customized. I think with the bigger studios, it's also kind of customized. They want to come out at a time when there's not a huge competition, you know. You want to come out with Star Wars is coming out, whatever. And so you have to pick, it's just like when you open a movie, you have to pick the right moment to open it, you know, when all the stars are in alignment. There aren't too many films opening or many films that are just like your films, or when you can get the right theater at the right time. It's, so, you know, it's important to be flexible, but I think that's kind of the norm. And I think the norm on pay TV is something like 6 months after that or 10 months after the theatrical release. And then you're on pay TV, I don't know, a year, 18 months, something like that. And then comes just other opportunities. Your VOD is usually the same as your home entertainment window, although there are many movies where the Sony Home Entertainment Company, with our blessing, makes a deal with Apple iTunes where they get it earlier because of the nature of the film. It would do better if it had like an exclusive for a period of time. So I think, I don't think there are hard and fast rules in most cases. The key when you license those movies is when a company asks for a lot of years, usually the business reason is they'll probably get more money if you can give television more years as you go roll it out.
Christine, you broached the question before, what makes a story uniquely theatrical? And I was wondering if you could both elaborate on that idea a little bit.
I guess for us, it is there do we feel like the filmmaker is somebody who has that kind of deft hand? Like if an audience will feel safe in their hands, really feel safe to go on a real journey to somewhere else. Is there something about it that has that breaks the sort of, I don't know, makes it not seem small? Like, is it a big character, a big story? Is there a universality to it? I mean, sometimes you just know it when you see it.
You know, there's a lot of nuance to it. It's how the movie plays in a theater. If you have a huge canvas like Wing Migration, it will never play as well on television as it will in a theater. I remember that documentary about the spelling bee,
Yeah.
Spellbound. We had turned it down. We watched it on the small screen. Says, it doesn't look too visually exciting. And I remember seeing it when it was in a movie theater,
Right.
and the whole audience is spelling the words back and forth, and you go, oh my God, did I miss this? This is, you know, that's an ultimate theatrical experience. I had an experience like this last year with Boyhood, you know. I think to really get the greatness of that film completely is to be in a dark theater where you're so focused on that screen for 2.5 hours or whatever it is, and it is spectacular. I'm not saying it's not spectacular on the small screen, but it's not the kind of thing that you can go off and multitask and do a lot of things while you're watching on the small screen, which I know a lot of you do.
Christine, earlier you said that success was harder than failure. Can you expound on that? Give us an example of a hard success.
Oh, I mean, you know, when you are lucky enough that you've made a film that actually it turned out the way you wanted. Somebody buys it. It goes out into the world. Critics like it and audiences like it. All of these things are like, a 1 in a million things, chances for it all to line up. Then there's, often a little bit of a feeding frenzy of people trying to either claim credit for the success or, get tickets to events.
The people come out of the woodwork when it's
They
a success.
really
When it's
do.
not, man, they head for the hills.
Then it's just like, then it's crickets. But, when something's really successful, then suddenly you're dealing with, this sort of overwhelming, and, and at the heart of all of that, I mean, look, Still Alice, I'm so grateful. I'm grateful that we worked with you guys. I'm grateful that all those stars lined up, that Julie won her Oscar. And I tried to remind myself every minute through it, like, this may not happen to you ever again, Like, enjoy it. Like, don't complain. Don't get upset when, people who shall remain nameless are asking for 7 tickets to and you're getting 1. And, but just enjoy it because you never know when it'll happen to you again.
You mentioned a film from Saudi Arabia, one from Venezuela. Do you find that the appetite for films from other parts of the world in the United States is expanding? I mean, for a long time it felt like international with Europe.
Here's the problem. The thing is that when a film crosses over, Amour crossed over, Lives of Others crossed over. There have been some Latin American movies that have crossed over. When those things cross over to that territory where it's more than $1 million at the box office, then it's more than 5. You will find in this day and age, and it's usually because of social media and the success of social media, that those films that cross over will do better than foreign language films have ever done over the years. But the problem is those foreign language films that don't go past that tipping point, that don't cross over, those films tend to be ignored more than ever before. So it's a feast or famine type of situation with foreign language films. It's great for the success stories, but really bad for everyone else, which is so regrettable because so many of those films are some of the best films being made today.
Christine, what have you learned as a producer from your project with Stony Brook?
What have I learned as a producer from running an MFA program? I've learned how great it is to have great benefits. I mean, look, for years I have taught sporadically at the undergraduate and graduate level and gone to speak at universities and institutions, film societies all over the world, literally all over the world, and all over America. So I really enjoy the back and forth with people from different cultures, from different, and from different generations, talking about why they want to tell stories, the stories they want to tell, et cetera. At Stony Brook, I've had the opportunity to really craft a film school the way I think it should be done. I mean, one of the things I learned when I was when I was at various institutions was that a lot of what people are learning in film school isn't very useful to them in this day and age. I see a lot of people nodding, so you must know what I mean. And a lot of people graduate, in insane debt and not really capable of earning their living. So I just was trying on a much more affordable basis, because it's a SUNY, it's a state university, to figure out an MFA program that I felt could actually launch people into this world, into this new world, in a way that gave them a shot. And, we're only in our 2nd year, but so far so good. So we'll see. Time will tell.
I think we have time for one final question.
Hell no. That's a big hell no. It's like that French proverb, the more it changes, the more it stays the same. It's the kind of movies I make. I mean, and, I don't know, I can't change, I'm not a leopard that can change its spots. I'm not gonna suddenly decide that there's, that I want, I don't even know what more commercial movies means. I know that actually I make, for the most part, commercial movies because they tend to make their money back because they're made for the right price, and that's a big, like you don't make a movie like Kill Your Darlings for $10 million. But if you make it for the right amount of money, everybody does okay, and that's really what it comes down to.
But you make them with the intention for them to work. So
Of
it
course
must be
I do.
in your brain that this is going to work.
Absolutely. But Still Alice is a good example because, the pressures on Still Alice were, boy, this is a bummer. And how are you going to get people to see it? And that was, we had to articulate that in a way in the filmmaking so that you guys would see that when you actually bought the movie.
When it was such a big success, it finally dawned on us an aspect of why it was a big success. It is really the first movie of its kind where the entire movie is from the patient's point of view.
Right.
And that is what the audiences responded to without even realizing that's what it was.
Right.
They responded to in a major way that gave it such a distinction from all other movies that were like that. It was not a Lifetime movie because it was like that,
Well, you asked me before if there was any movie that we made that didn't turn out the way we thought it would. Is there a movie that you got behind, bought, or pre-bought that you just thought was going to go a lot farther than?
Yes, there are several, but the one that I always remember is this Irish film. It was called Dancing at Lunasa. It was based on a prize-winning play. It was one of the most brilliant plays. I think it's a brilliant film. Meryl Streep was in this ensemble cast. I still cry like a baby when I watch it. I'm amazed at kind of how it's made in a lean sort of way. The actresses are all stupendous. So is Michael Gambon and Rhys Ifans. And not only did the critics destroy it, but no one went to see it. And to this day, I don't get that because I just adore it. And it may be just a blind's eye. I don't know.
Well, we made a movie that's going to show as part of Killer's retrospective in November called I Shot Andy Warhol, which I still think, it's gotten, now it's become an evergreen. But when it came out, people didn't go to see it. And I remembered I would go and stand in the back of the theater and go, what's wrong with them? Yeah. Like, why aren't there lines around the block?
There are a lot of silver lining stories like that one. City of Lost Children was a movie I thought our careers were over because we invested in this thing, which was science fiction and all this. And now, 20 years later, it's churning more than ever before. And it's just interesting how that works. I remember also when we saw Wings of Desire at Cannes, and we were blown away by it. But as I looked around the theater, half the theater had left. And it was the end of Cannes, and people were exhausted and so forth. And then it was panned by the New York Times. And Vincent Canby said it was bad. And then, so we kind of tried to orchestrate it. This was in the 80s. Tried to orchestrate it so Janet Maslin would review it. She panned it. But then the movie played over a year in Los Angeles, played almost a year here. And to this day, it's become a major evergreen. So there are ways for these films to find that audience and for there to be a happy ending. And I just think that's why when you're talking about this stuff, Christine, what blows me away about you is the patience. You can say you put it on the shelf, but the fact is you hang in there for 7 years and that's Boys Don't Cry. The problem with today's age is no one has patience. And it's patience will out when it has to do with quality independent films, and I still believe in that.
Well, but sometimes the patience is just waiting for the pendulum to swing back.
Yeah.
You know, like maybe they weren't ready for this movie then, but maybe now people are. Or some other, there's new financiers coming out. I mean, somebody asked me, is it easier to finance? And I don't think I completely answered the question. The fact is that there's a lot of money out there for independent films. There's a lot of money out there for content. That's really what it is. And figuring out how to tap into it, at the end of the day, I couldn't do what I do if I didn't believe that quality wins out. I really do believe that. My heart of hearts. I know there's a million things that help, that push, etc. But a great script, a great director, eventually, I believe, are going to get to tell their story.
That's only part one. But part two is you have a lot to say about certain issues, and that's the other reason those movies work, and the other reason you're here for the long haul, because you have something to say. You have more to say on issues you feel really strongly about.
You think we're in for another 25 years?
God, I hope so.